Hello everyone, I'm titling this video Random 3 a.m. Thoughts because it's about 3 a.m., maybe 3:30, and I haven't made a video in a while, so I just wanted to get something out there. This was kind of prompted by a guy I follow on Twitter who retweeted my pinned tweet that I have my YouTube channel linked there, and he just basically said that he likes to listen to me. So it kind of prompted me to want to do a video. Here's a conglomerate of things that I want to talk about. So first of all, well, let's start here. There's been some interesting experiences that I've had lately, and I don't really know how to make heads or tails of them. One of them is more explicit in terms of its meaning, but I still don't know for sure. And the other one is just a complete mystery to me. So let me get into this. Well, first of all, let me say I tend to run more with the Reformed crowd of Christianity than I do with the evangelical, although, Reformed is Protestant, so evangelical largely encompasses the Reformed camp, but there's all sorts of evangelicals, and I typically find myself, at least in soteriology and other things like free will and things like that, that I tend to take a more reformed approach. So, but conversely to that, I do think that, well, my starting to be a sincere Christian, my basis for being a Christian is has some roots more down towards I believe in the supernatural. I believe supernatural things happen and we experience those things sometimes. And well, anyways, getting into it, departing from my Reformed camp brothers for a moment, I'll talk about some experiences that I've had. So one time, I'd been awake for quite a while. I've talked about this on the channel before, but my sleeping pattern is really crazy. And a lot of the times I will go exorbitant amount of time awake, followed by ridiculously long times of being asleep. And this is, in some sense, a byproduct of having a mental illness and things not really being regulated for me very well. But anyways, I was up for a long time, and I had been up for quite a while, and I was trying to sleep. And I was laying down in bed, and I was really close to being asleep. I might have even been asleep. I don't know for sure. But what I do know is that as I was laying in bed, I felt this presence, this strong, very strong presence that seemed like it rested on my chest, and I audibly heard some words that sounded like Hebrew to me. I couldn't make out what they were, and I still don't know what was said there, and I don't remember what it was that was said in terms of the phonetics of it. But as soon as I heard it and felt it, I immediately sat up in my bed, and I was like wide awake, and I didn't know what on earth that was, and I decided I would read in the scriptures to because I was freaked out. I was freaked out at what happened, and I couldn't explain it, and I didn't know what was going on, and I still to this day, this happened. This must have happened a month ago or so, and I still don't know to this time if it was a demonic attack on me, or if it was something else that had to do with God's presence. All I know is that what I would describe the presence as is heavy. That would be the way that I would describe it. Is it felt very heavy, and it was like this magnitude of spiritual force that was weighted on me, and I don't know what that was. There's been other experiences where I've been laying in bed and weird things happen to me. I recall one time I was laying in bed. It was night, and I was not doing well mentally at the time, but I audibly heard it almost sounded like an animal snarling, like a snarling noise that I heard, and it was audible, and it totally freaked me out. I immediately, oh my gosh, what was that? And I woke up, and it was scared the crap out of me, and I got up, and I couldn't sleep after that, even though I was really tired. I couldn't sleep. It was when I was paranoid, and that might have been a demonic attack combined with being tired, combined with my mental illness, all these things interplaying all at one time. And I do believe that it was supernatural in some sense. I guess you could say my tie to sleep is in some sense sort of a supernatural thing, because I typically have these really weird experiences. Not typically, I mean every once in a blue moon I'll have a really weird experience that I can't explain that happens when I happen to be trying to sleep. I had another experience, and it was daytime and nobody else was in the house. This was when I was living at my parents' house. I'm now living on my own. But I was laying there, and I audibly heard the words "you bit," and it sounded, how do I say this? It sounded like a child, but it didn't sound like a child. It sounded like an immature person, I guess you could say. That's more or less how I heard it. Another experience that I had recently, must have been about a week ago or so, is I was lying in bed, almost asleep, and I physically felt like a kind of tingling, or almost like electricity going through my body and out through my hands. And I had the words free will that went through my head at that time. This was when I was starting to write a chapter in my book. I'm writing a book now, in case anyone is interested in getting it. Let me know in the community or whatever tab on my YouTube channel. You can let me know there if you'd be interested in buying it. It's not finished yet. I'm still writing it, but it was right when I started. I had this experience right when I was started to write about free will. Didn't know what this experience was for, or why it happened. I didn't really think much of it. As I started writing on this chapter has been the hardest chapter for me to write, because free will is such a complicated thing, and so I've been reading, meta studies on cognitive function and things like that, but I still want to present my own perspective on it, because the book is about my own theories on things as being a Christian schizophrenic, kind of like my YouTube channel. I already had a sort of an outline for how I wanted to do the chapter, but every time I sat down to try and write about it, it was like crawling through mud trying to write for it. And so I had this experience, and then a while later, as I was in prayer, I was outside, I was sitting down, and it was like this thought came to my head. You can either write about free will or you can write about God's providence. And what was strange about that is I already have a chapter in my book about God's providence, and so that's been the way I have it written now on God's providence is not very good, and I probably got to redo a lot of it. But anyways, this thought that went through my head was you can either write on free will or you can write on God's providence. And this was confusing to me because I've spent a lot of time trying to understand free will. I've developed a whole methodology about how we can make free choices, which you can, in some sense, you can watch it in my Perception series on how I view free will. This chapter is taking a little bit different take, but anyways, after I had that, it was confusing. Like how am I going to write about God's providence and not write about free will? How am I going to write about providence and not write about man's free actions, basically? And so I came inside and I bowed down on my hands and knees in prayer, as I do occasionally. I think it's a good practice to pray that way if you're a Christian and you want to up your game a little bit in prayer, in your prayer life. It's like get on your hands and knees and just bow down and give God your heart, basically. As I was praying, I said, Lord, give me wisdom, give me wisdom, give me wisdom. I just kept repeating that phrase about this chapter. That's what I was praying about, that God would give me wisdom for what to write. And I recalled as I was praying, as I had a lull after I got done praying, and I got up, it was like, oh yeah, that's right. That the day right before that, I recalled watching a video that R.C. Sproul did, who's in my reform camp now, and he was saying it was on the different worlds of God, and the premise of the teaching was that people come to him and they say, how do I know what God's will is for me in this particular situation? He said, one of the things he said is you don't know always right at the point of making the decision what God's will is. So it's providential in that whatever happens is providential and God meant it to happen. So sometimes you don't know until after the fact. But he said one of the major points that he made is that if you want to know God's will, you go to the scriptures. And it was a perplexing thing for me because I thought, how are you supposed to... An example that he gave, for example, is do you want to marry Sally or do you want to marry Marge? And you have two people that you could marry. It's like his solution was, well, marry the one that you want to, as long as they're both Christians. If one of them's a Christian and one of them's not a Christian, then your choice is easy because you marry the Christian one. And it was about discerning the will of God for that. And but the major focus that he had for this teaching was to discern the will of God through reading the scriptures. And as I was watching that video, I kind of had this thought like, That actually seems like a really plausible way to do it, because the topics in the Bible are so vast. And I do believe that God speaks to us supernaturally when we read the Bible. Now, granted, we have to take into context exegetical teaching of the Bible, but there's so many topics that are discussed in the Bible that you can probably find the answer to your particular question in the Bible. So, as I remembered that, I went to the Bible, and it was May 14th, and so I thought, well, read my proverb for the day, and I opened up to Proverbs and I started reading. I went to Proverbs because I wanted to get wisdom, and that's what I was praying for, is wisdom. And I recalled, as I was reading Proverbs, I recalled the verses that talk about God's providence in Proverbs, and as I was reading, it dawned on me, it doesn't really talk about free will in Proverbs. It talks about consequences and blessings and all that if you do this, God's going to do this, and if you do that, then this is going to be the result. And it's to facilitate a wise way of life. And I recall the topic of free will is just not discussed in Proverbs, not the way we understand it today, at least. Like, you can do whatever you want. It's like, no, these are certain precepts that God has given us, that if we want to live a wise life, we have constraints. And so so I decided from that, after all that was said and done, I decided I was gonna title the chapter Human Will instead of Free Will, which was a working title. And strangely enough, after I had about 1,600 words written in that chapter already. It's probably going to be about, I don't know, 2,800 or 3,000 words at this point. But it was kind of like everything sort of came together, and it was like you can write about human will without necessarily detracting from God's providence. So yeah, that's a little bit about some of the weird things that I've experienced with sleep, and a recent experience that I had that could have led to a providential way of how I plan to write this book. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you later.